watch my mother-in-law lift the serving spoon from my casserole. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembling just slightly as she lets the contents splatter back into the dish. The sound echoes through the suddenly silent dining room. "Oh dear," Pamela says, her voice dripping with false concern. "I simply can't serve this to our guests. The consistency is all wrong, and that smell." She wrinkles her nose, pushing the dish away like it's contaminated. I'm scarlet, and this is the moment I realize I've married into a war zone. The crystal chandelier catches the afternoon light, throwing prismatic daggers across the formal dining table where 12 of Daniel's most important family friends sit in awkward silence. My husband shifts in his chair beside me, his hand finding mine under the table, but he says nothing. Absolutely nothing. "Mother, I'm sure it's fine," Daniel finally mumbles, but his grip on my hand has gone slack, useless. Pamela's laugh tinkles like breaking glass. "Darling, we have standards to maintain. I'll just fetch the backup entree I prepared." She glides from the room, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors like a countdown to my humiliation. I feel the heat crawling up my neck, but I force myself to sit straight, to meet the pitying glances from around the table with a steel spine. Walter, my father-in-law, takes a long drink from his wine glass, studying the burgundy liquid like it holds the secrets to family harmony. "I spent 6 hours on that recipe," I say to no one in particular, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. 6 hours following your mother's exact instructions, Daniel." Nina, Daniel's cousin, catches my eye from across the table and gives me a subtle nod. She knows. She's been here before, watching Pamela's calculated demonstrations of power. Pamela returns with a perfect roast, presenting it with the flourish of a magician pulling off their signature trick. "This is how we do things in our family," she announces, cutting into the meat with surgical precision. "Perhaps, Scarlet dear, you could benefit from some cooking lessons. I know a wonderful instructor." The words hang in the air like poison gas. Daniel coughs softly, still silent, still complicit. I watch as the plates are passed around, my casserole sitting abandoned at the far end of the table, a monument to my supposed inadequacy. "Actually," I say, surprising myself with the calm in my voice, "I trained at Le Cordon Bleu during my year in Paris." The lie slides off my tongue smooth as butter, and I see Pamela's knife pause mid-slice. "But I thought following your recipe would be more appropriate." A flash of uncertainty crosses Pamela's perfectly composed face. Good. Let her wonder what else she doesn't know about me. The rest of dinner passes in a blur of forced small talk and calculated glances. I notice how Walter's wine glass never seems to empty, how Nina watches everything with sharp eyes, how Daniel becomes increasingly engrossed in his phone beneath the table. Later, as the guests file out with polite murmurs and air kisses, Pamela corners me in the kitchen. "That was quite an interesting statement about Le Cordon Bleu," she says, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I must have missed that detail during our getting to know you phase." I meet her gaze steadily. "There's quite a lot you don't know about me, Pamela." She laughs, but there's an edge to it now. "Oh, sweetheart. This is my house, my family, my rules. Best you learn that quickly." As I watch her walk away, something shifts inside me. She's right, this is her house, her family, her carefully constructed world of control and manipulation. But she's wrong about one thing, these aren't her rules anymore. Not after tonight. I pull out my phone and text Nina, "We need to talk." The game is about to change, and Pamela doesn't even know she's already lost the first round. The coffee grows cold between my parents as they stare at Daniel across our dining room table. My father's jaw tightens with each passing second of silence. And my mother's fingers drum against her cup in that particular rhythm that means she's choosing her words carefully. So you just stood there? My father finally asks, his voice low and controlled. While your mother humiliated my daughter in front of everyone. Daniel adjusts his tie, a nervous habit I've noticed becomes more pronounced whenever he's cornered. James, you have to understand, my mother can be particular about these things. She means well. Particular. I snap the word like a twig. Is that what we're calling it now? My mother reaches across the table, her hand covering mine. Scarlett, honey, maybe this is just her way of adjusting. Some mothers have trouble letting go. Linda, my father interrupts, this isn't about letting go. This is about basic respect. I watch Daniel's face carefully as he processes my father's words. There's something there, beneath his carefully maintained expression, something that looks almost like guilt. But it vanishes as quickly as it appears, replaced by that maddeningly neutral smile he wears whenever we discuss his mother. I'll talk to her, Daniel offers, the same empty promise he's made 3 times this week. She's just under a lot of pressure with the charity gala coming up. My father's laugh is sharp enough to cut glass. The charity gala. Of course. Heaven forbid anything interfere with Pamela's social calendar. Actually, I say, an idea forming, I've been thinking about helping with the gala. Getting more involved in the family's charitable work. The words taste like ash in my mouth, but I force them out anyway. Daniel brightens immediately. That's perfect. Mother's always saying she needs more help with the foundation. My mother's fingers stop their drumming, and she gives me a look that says she knows exactly what I'm doing. She raised me, after all. She knows when I'm plotting. Speaking of the foundation, my father says, his tone deceptively casual, I heard some interesting things at the golf club yesterday. About some discrepancies in the books a few years back. Daniel's tie adjustment becomes a full-blown strangling motion. That was just a misunderstanding. Everything was cleared up. Was it? My father's eyes narrow. Because my friend on the board seemed to think. I should get going, Daniel stands abruptly, checking his phone. Early meeting tomorrow. Thank you both for dinner. He kisses my cheek, a quick, distracted gesture, and practically sprints for the door. The sound of his car starting is almost lost beneath my father's heavy sigh. That boy has a yellow streak a mile wide, he mutters. James, my mother warns, but there's no real conviction in it. I clear the dishes, letting the familiar motions calm my racing thoughts. Nina's coming over tomorrow, I tell them. She has some interesting stories about Pamela's handling of the foundation funds. Scarlett, my mother's voice carries that note of concern I remember from childhood's scraped knees and broken hearts. Be careful. Revenge might feel good in the moment, but this isn't about revenge, I lie, stacking plates with more force than necessary. This is about protecting myself. And maybe others too. My father stands, helping me with the dishes despite my protests. Just remember, he says quietly, whatever you're planning, you'll have to live with the consequences. All of them. Later, after they've gone home, I sit in the dark of my kitchen, scrolling through photos on my phone. Daniel and me on our wedding day, both smiling, both believing in something that feels increasingly like a fairy tale. Pamela in the background of every shot, watching, calculating, planning her next move. My phone buzzes with a text from Nina, found something. Big. Call me when you're alone. I glance at the bedroom where Daniel sleeps, oblivious to the storm gathering around his perfect family. Part of me wants to wake him, to shake him until he sees what's really happening. Instead, I step onto the balcony and dial Nina's number. Sometimes the only way to save a marriage is to risk destroying it completely. Nina slides a manila folder across the cafe table, her eyes scanning the crowded space like we're conducting an espionage operation. Tax records, bank statements, everything from the foundation's last 5 years, she whispers. Pamela's been cooking the books since before Daniel joined the board. My fingers trace the edge of the folder, but I don't open it. Not yet. How bad? Nearly $500,000 in administrative expenses that somehow never made it to any actual administration. Nina's wedding ring catches the light as she taps the folder. She's been using the foundation like her personal ATM. The cafe bustles around us, but all I can hear is the blood rushing in my ears. Does Walter know? Uncle Walter. Nina's laugh is bitter. He hasn't been sober enough to sign his own name in years, let alone audit the books. I finally open the folder, and numbers swim before my eyes. Donations redirected, expenses inflated, charitable contributions that never reached their intended recipients. Each page tells a story of calculated deception. There's more. Nina leans closer. Remember that rehab facility Pamela claims saved her sister's life? The one she fundraises for every year. I nod, remembering the tearful speech at last year's gala. It doesn't exist. Never did. That money's been going straight into an offshore account. My phone buzzes, a text from Daniel. Mother wants us for dinner tonight. Important announcement about the gala. Perfect timing, I murmur, showing Nina the message. Scarlett, Nina's voice drops even lower, be careful. Pamela's not just protecting her reputation anymore. This is criminal territory. I gather the documents, sliding them into my bag. That's exactly what makes it perfect. The drive to Pamela's mansion gives me time to strategize. I've learned to read the signs, the perfectly manicured gardens, the spotless windows. The careful arrangement of luxury cars in the circular driveway. Everything screaming wealth and control. Walter opens the door, crystal tumbler already in hand. The women are in the parlor, he mumbles, wandering off toward his study. I find Pamela holding court among her usual sycophants, Daniel hovering at her shoulder like a well-trained puppet. Her smile freezes slightly when she sees me. Scarlett, darling. So glad you could join us. We were just discussing the gala's beneficiaries. The rehab center again this year. I ask innocently, watching her face. Among others, she waves dismissively. We're expanding our reach. Daniel's been instrumental in identifying new opportunities. I meet my husband's eyes, searching for any sign he knows what his mother's been doing. His gaze slides away too quickly. Actually, Pamela continues, that's why I wanted everyone here. We're restructuring the foundation's leadership. Daniel will be taking over as executive director. The room erupts in congratulatory murmurs. I feel the trap closing, see the calculated gleam in Pamela's eyes. She's binding Daniel closer, making him complicit. That's wonderful news, I manage, my hand tightening around my bag. When does this take effect? Immediately, Daniel says, finally looking at me directly. Mother thinks it's time for a new generation to take the reins. And of course, Pamela adds, we'll need to review all the previous administration's decisions. Clean slate, fresh start. She knows. Somehow, she knows I'm onto her. This isn't just about control anymore, it's about covering her tracks and using Daniel as a shield. I excuse myself to the powder room, hands shaking as I pull out my phone to text Nina, she's making Daniel executive director. Trying to bury the evidence. Nina's response is immediate, don't wait. Use what we have now. I stare at my reflection in the ornate mirror, remembering my father's warning about consequences. But as I hear Pamela's laughter floating down the hallway, something hardens inside me. Opening my bag, I remove one particular document, proof of the non-existent rehab center, and tuck it into my sleeve. Then I rejoin the party, where Pamela is already planning next year's gala. I have some thoughts about potential beneficiaries, I announce, stepping into the circle. In fact, I'd love to hear more about that rehabilitation center you're so passionate about, Pamela. Maybe we could visit it together. The crystal glass in her hand trembles ever so slightly, and I know I've drawn first blood. The foundation's financial records spread across my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. Every highlighted entry, every suspicious transaction mocks my previous blindness. 3 empty wine glasses stand guard over the documents, mine, Nina's, and the one Daniel never touched before he left for his mother's house. Again. We should take this to the police, Nina says, rubbing her temples. I trace a column of numbers that doesn't add up. Not yet. There's something we're missing. My phone lights up with a text from Daniel, working late at Mother's. Don't wait up. Nina catches my expression. He's helping her cover it up, isn't he? I don't know. But I do know. I've known since I found his signature on documents dated 3 years ago, authorizing transfers to that phantom rehabilitation center. The doorbell rings, making us both jump. Through the peephole, I see Walter swaying slightly on my doorstep, his usual tumbler nowhere in sight. I know what you're doing, he says when I open the door, his words surprisingly clear. And you need to stop. Nina appears behind me. Uncle Walter. Not now, Nina. He pushes past us into the kitchen, stops short at the sight of the scattered papers. Just as I thought. Did Pamela send you? I ask. Walter laughs, but there's no humor in it. Pamela doesn't send me anywhere. Hasn't for years. He picks up a document, studies it with surprisingly steady hands. You think you're the first person to notice the discrepancies? You knew. Nina's voice cracks. All this time. Why do you think I drink? He sets the paper down carefully. It's easier than watching everything fall apart. I feel the ground shifting beneath my feet. Daniel knows too, doesn't he? That's why he's there tonight. Walter's silence is answer enough. They're moving money around, he finally says. Covering tracks. But it's bigger than just Pamela's embezzlement. The whole family fortune. He trails off, shaking his head. What about the family fortune? Nina presses. It's gone. Has been for years. The foundation, the mansion, the social standing, it's all smoke and mirrors. Pamela's been running a pyramid scheme through the charity, using new donations to cover old debts. And now, my phone buzzes again. A text from an unknown number, back off or everyone goes down. Including Daniel. I show it to Walter. He nods grimly. They know you know. Who's they? Nina demands. People you don't want to meet. Walter moves toward the door, then pauses. Scarlett, if you love my son, let this go. Some truths destroy everything they touch. After he leaves, Nina and I sit in silence, the weight of his words settling around us like dust. What are you going to do? She finally asks. I pick up my phone, staring at the threatening message. Then I open my photos and find one from last Christmas, Daniel and me laughing, Pamela watching from the background. Walter nursing his ever-present drink. A family built on lies, held together by secrets. The truth doesn't destroy everything, I say, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Lies do that all by themselves. I start gathering the documents, organizing them with mechanical precision. Nina, I need you to take these somewhere safe. Don't tell me where. What are you planning? I'm going to give Pamela exactly what she wants. I meet Nina's worried gaze. I'm going to back off, play the dutiful daughter-in-law, help with the gala preparations. Make her think she's won. And then, I think of Daniel, probably sitting in his mother's study right now, helping bury evidence of years of fraud. My husband, the man I thought I knew, choosing loyalty to lies over truth. And then I'm going to burn it all down. I pick up Daniel's untouched wine glass, study it in the light. Sometimes you have to lose everything to save yourself. Nina gathers the documents, hesitating at the door. Be careful. People like Pamela, they don't just lose. They take everyone down with them. I smile, but there's no warmth in it. I'm counting on it. The gala committee meeting feels like a performance in an elegant prison, with Pamela presiding over her court of socialites in the mansion's sunroom. I play my part perfectly, suggesting centerpiece arrangements and silent auction items with practiced enthusiasm. Scarlett's been such a help, Pamela announces to the room, her hand squeezing my shoulder like a vice. I don't know what we'd do without her dedication to the cause. The cause. I suppress a bitter laugh, thinking of Nina's latest text, 3 more shell companies discovered, all leading back to offshore accounts. Actually, I say, keeping my voice light, I've been researching similar foundations. Their success stories are so inspiring. I pull out my tablet, watching Pamela's reflection in the window. Especially this rehabilitation center in Phoenix. The crystal paperweight in Pamela's hand trembles slightly. We should focus on our own programs, dear. Speaking of which, she turns to the group, but I notice her hands shaking as she pours her tea. A commotion at the door interrupts her deflection. Walter stumbles in, his face flushed. Ladies, he slurs, but his eyes are sharp when they meet mine. Sorry to interrupt. Pamela, there's a call. Board of Directors. The color drains from Pamela's face. Excuse me, everyone. Scarlett, would you mind taking over? I watch them leave, counting to 30 before following. Their voices drift from Walter's study. They're asking questions about the Phoenix accounts, Walter's voice, suddenly clear. Someone's been talking. Impossible. I've taken care of everything. Pamela's control wavers. Unless. Daniel, have you spoken to your wife about? No. Daniel's voice surprises me. I hadn't known he was here. She suspects something, but she doesn't know details. My wedding ring feels like it's burning my finger. We need to move faster, Pamela says. Transfer everything before the gala. Daniel, you'll need to sign. I can't keep doing this, Mother. Can't. Pamela's laugh is brittle. Darling, you're already involved. Have been since the beginning. Or shall we discuss your role in the Morgan investment scandal? Silence follows. I press myself against the wall, heart pounding. The gala's in 3 days, Pamela continues. After that, none of this will matter. Walter, make sure those board members understand the consequences of asking too many questions. I retreat before they emerge, my mind racing. Back in the sunroom, I smile and discuss table arrangements while sending a text to Nina, 3 days. Everything happens at the gala. That evening, Daniel comes home late, smelling of his mother's expensive scotch. You've been spending a lot of time with the committee, he says, watching me remove my jewelry. Just trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law. I meet his eyes in the mirror. Your mother seems stressed about the gala. She wants everything perfect. He moves behind me, hands on my shoulders. You know how she is. I lean back against him, feeling his tension. The foundation means everything to her, doesn't it? His fingers tighten slightly. Scarlett. If you know something. What would I know? I turn to face him, searching his expression. Daniel, if you needed help, if you were in trouble, you'd tell me, wouldn't you? For a moment, something breaks in his face. He opens his mouth, closes it, then kisses my forehead. I love you, he says, but it sounds like goodbye. After he falls asleep, I slip out to the balcony and call Nina. The board's asking questions, I tell her. They're planning something for the gala. We need to move first. Scarlett, Nina hesitates, there's something else. I found Daniel's name on documents from 5 years ago. Before you met. He wasn't just covering for Pamela, he was. I know. My voice doesn't shake. Send everything to my father. Tell him to be ready. I end the call and stare at the city lights, thinking of Pamela's trembling hands, Walter's sharp eyes, Daniel's almost confession. In 3 days, their carefully constructed world will shatter. And I'll be the one holding the hammer. The gala ballroom sparkles like a fortress of crystal and lies. I adjust my black evening gown, feeling the USB drive pressed against my ribs, secured in my modified bra. Somewhere in the crowd, my father waits with 2 federal agents, disguised as wealthy donors. Pamela floats through her admirers like a queen holding court one last time, though she doesn't know it yet. Daniel stands at her side, perfect in his tuxedo, perfect in his devotion. The sight makes my stomach turn. Everything's ready, Nina whispers as she passes, champagne flute in hand. The presentation's been modified. Just waiting for your signal. I nod, watching Pamela approach the podium. The annual foundation video presentation is her crowning moment, her chance to showcase their charitable works. This year's version will be slightly different. My dear friends, Pamela begins, her voice carrying across the hushed room. Tonight we celebrate not just our foundation's achievements, but family, trust, and legacy. The irony tastes bitter in my mouth. I move toward the AV controls, heart pounding. Scarlett. Walter's hand closes around my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. Don't. Let go of me. You don't understand what you're about to do. His eyes are clear, desperate. This isn't just about Pamela. There are people involved who what? Who'll lose their illegal investments? Their blood money? Who'll lose their lives? His whisper cuts like a blade. Including Daniel. Maybe you too. I falter, seeing real fear in his eyes. On stage, Pamela continues her speech, each word dripping with false sincerity. The Foundation's work with rehabilitation centers has touched countless lives, she says, and several people dab at their eyes. Particularly our flagship center in Phoenix. My finger hovers over the button that will start the modified presentation. Walter's grip tightens. Last chance, Scarlett. Walk away. Instead, I press play. The screen behind Pamela flickers. Instead of heartwarming testimonials, financial records appear. Transfer documents. Shell companies. The Phantom Rehabilitation Center's empty lot in Phoenix. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Pamela turns, her face draining of color as she sees the evidence of her fraud displayed 20 feet high. There seems to be a technical difficulty, she stammers, but it's too late. More documents flash across the screen. Board members' names. Dates. Amounts. Daniel's signature, again and again, authorizing fraudulent transfers. Security. Pamela shrieks, but the guards by the door don't move. They're not her guards anymore. I step forward, my voice carrying across the stunned silence. The Phoenix Rehabilitation Center doesn't exist. Neither do the other programs. The money, your donations, went straight into private accounts. Isn't that right, Pamela? How dare you, she begins, but Daniel cuts her off. Stop, mother. His voice sounds dead. It's over. The ballroom erupts in chaos. My father moves through the crowd with the agents, their badges now visible. Nina appears at my side, gripping my arm as Pamela's perfectly curated world implodes. But something's wrong. Walter's warning echoes in my head as I notice men in expensive suits moving purposefully through the crowd. Not toward Pamela or Daniel, but toward me. Nina, I whisper, get out. Now. What? But. Go. She disappears just as one of the men reaches me. His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Harrison. Would you come with us, please? Some people would like to discuss your recent investigations. I look for my father, for the agents, but they're occupied with Pamela and Daniel. The man's hand closes around my arm, and I feel something hard press against my ribs. Don't make a scene, he murmurs. We're just going to take a little drive. Across the room, I catch Daniel's eye one last time. He's being handcuffed, but there's something else in his expression, pure terror as he watches the man lead me toward the exit. I realize too late that exposing Pamela's fraud was just the surface. Whatever I've stumbled into goes deeper, darker, and now I'm falling straight into it. The last thing I see before they guide me out is Walter, raising his ever-present glass in a mock toast. His earlier words echo in my head, some truths destroy everything they touch. I'm about to find out exactly what he meant. The warehouse office smells like old money and fresh fear. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights twinkle innocently, masking the fact that I'm 15 stories up with no way down. Quite the performance at the gala, the man behind the desk says. He's older, expensive suit, manicured hands. The kind of man who makes decisions about other people's lives over golf. Though somewhat incomplete in its scope. Where's my father? My voice doesn't shake, even though my wrists ache from the zip ties. Safe. For now. He slides a folder across the desk. Unlike your husband. Or you. The folder contains photos. Daniel in handcuffs. Nina being questioned by men in suits. My parents' house under surveillance. The foundation wasn't just laundering money for the family, was it? I ask, pieces clicking into place. It was laundering money for everyone. Politicians, corporations. Smart girl. The door opens, and Walter walks in, sober as a judge. I tried to warn you. You could have told me the truth. The truth. Walter laughs. The truth is, you weren't supposed to survive that drive here. But someone insisted on talking first. The desk man's phone buzzes. His expression changes. She's here. Pamela sweeps in, still wearing her gala gown, though her perfect composure has cracked. You stupid, stupid girl, she spits. Do you have any idea what you've done? Exposed you for what you are. Exposed all of us. She slams her hands on the desk. Years of careful work, millions in arrangements, all destroyed because you couldn't handle a few harsh words about your cooking. Mother. Daniel's voice makes us all turn. He stands in the doorway, suit rumpled, escorted by 2 guards. Stop. Daniel. Pamela's voice breaks. How are you here? Because I made a deal. He won't look at me. Full confession. Names, dates, accounts. Everything. The desk man rises slowly. You did what? It's over, Daniel continues. FBI's moving on every account, every connection. I gave them everything an hour ago. Chaos erupts. The desk man barks orders into his phone. Walter lunges for the door. One guard draws his gun. You betrayed us. Pamela's screech cuts through the chaos. Your own family. No, Mother. You betrayed us. Years ago. When you turned our foundation into this poison. I feel something cold press into my hands. Nina, appearing from nowhere, cutting my zip ties. Run, she whispers. But I don't run. I stand, facing Pamela as her world crumbles for the second time tonight. You wanted to teach me about family. I say quietly. About loyalty. Here's what I learned. True loyalty isn't about keeping secrets. It's about stopping the people you love from destroying themselves. Guards. The desk man shouts, but the office door bursts open. FBI agents flood in, led by my father. Actually, Daniel says, they work for us now. Have been for weeks. Ever since Scarlett first discovered the Phoenix accounts. Pamela's face goes slack. You were working together. Not at first, I admit. But when Daniel came to me 3 weeks ago, told me everything. We realized the only way to end this was to play our parts. Make you think we were against each other while we gathered evidence. The foundation, the accounts, the deals, they're all poisoned, Daniel continues. But we don't have to be. Pamela looks between us, her carefully constructed reality shattering. Then she lunges for the desk drawer. Gun, someone shouts. Everything moves in slow motion. The drawer opening. Metal glinting. My father shouting. Daniel stepping in front of me. But it's Walter who moves fastest, tackling his wife before she can raise the weapon. Enough, he growls. It's done. As the agents move in, reading rights, securing the scene, Daniel reaches for my hand. I let him take it, feeling the tremors in his fingers. I'm sorry, he whispers. For not telling you sooner. For letting it get this far. I watch Pamela being led away, her perfect mask finally shattered completely. Sometimes, I say, the only way to save a family is to break it first. Outside, sirens paint the night red and blue, and I wonder if any of us will ever truly recover from the truths we've uncovered. But at least there are truths now. The courtroom empties like an ebbing tide, leaving me alone with the echo of the judge's verdict. 15 years for Pamela. 8 for the Foundation's board members. Immunity for Daniel in exchange for his testimony. I gather my belongings, fingers brushing against the divorce papers in my bag. Still unsigned. Scarlett. Daniel stands in the doorway, looking smaller somehow without his expensive suit, without his mother's shadow looming over him. Can we talk? We find ourselves in the courthouse garden, autumn leaves scattering across the bench between us. A perfect metaphor for our marriage, beautiful things, dying slowly. I kept waiting, I say, for you to be the man I thought I married. Even after I found the documents, even after Nina showed me the proof. I kept thinking, he'll choose me. He'll do the right thing. I did choose you. In the end. The end. I taste the words. That's the problem, isn't it? It had to reach the end before you found your courage. He pulls something from his pocket, the key to our apartment. I've packed my things. Moving in with Nina until. He trails off, both of us knowing there is no until. How's Walter? Rehab. Real rehab, not. He attempts a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. He's talking about writing a book. The truth about truth or something equally philosophical. A court officer approaches, hesitates. Mrs. Harrison. Your mother's here. I should go. I stand, but Daniel catches my hand. I loved you, he says. That part wasn't a lie. I know. That's what makes it worse. My mother waits by her car, arms open. Over her shoulder, I see Nina talking with my father, probably discussing the foundation's legitimate assets being transferred to actual charities. Ready to come home? Mom asks. Not yet. I pull the divorce papers from my bag. There's something I need to do first. I find Pamela in the holding area, waiting for transport. Her designer clothes have been replaced by prison orange, but her spine is still steel. Come to gloat? She asks. No. I slide the divorce papers through the window. I came to thank you. She blinks. Thank me. You taught me something important. About family, about truth, about the price of revenge. I tap the papers. Daniel needs your signature too. One last act as head of the family. You destroyed everything I built. No, Pamela. You did that. The moment you decided appearances mattered more than reality. The moment you taught Daniel that love means lying. She takes the papers with trembling hands. And what happens now? You ride off into the sunset, head held high, the virtuous victor. Now. I go home. I rebuild. I learn to trust again. I meet her eyes. And maybe someday, you'll learn that the truth doesn't have to destroy everything it touches. Sometimes it sets us free. Freedom. She laughs bitterly. Is that what you call this? Sign the papers, Pamela. Let him go. Let all of it go. Outside, the autumn air tastes like possibilities. My phone buzzes, a text from Nina, lunch tomorrow. I'm starting a new foundation. Could use someone who knows right from wrong. I smile, thinking of Pamela's first dinner party, of that ruined casserole that started everything. Of how sometimes the smallest slights can lead to the biggest revelations. My mother's car waits, but I decide to walk. Past the courthouse where justice was finally served, past the mansion where lies once ruled, past the life I thought I wanted. The divorce papers will arrive at my lawyer's office tomorrow, signed by both Daniel and Pamela. A final gift, though they'll never see it that way. Because in the end, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about learning that sometimes love means walking away. That truth, no matter how painful, is better than the prettiest lie. And that family, real family, is built on foundations stronger than money or power or perfectly planned dinner parties. It's built on truth. Even when that truth changes everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the cost of standing up for what's right. Especially then.
My name is Irene, and I'm just a simple girl from a modest family. I graduated from college and started working as a nurse at City General Hospital. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved helping people and making a difference in their lives. On that fateful day, I was rushing through the emergency room, arms full of supplies, when the doors burst open. 2 paramedics wheeled in a stretcher, and on it lay a man in a torn leather jacket and shattered motorcycle helmet. What happened? I asked, immediately setting down my load and moving to assist. Rich boy on a fancy bike lost control, one of the paramedics grunted. Hit a guardrail. Lucky his gear held up, or he'd be in worse shape. Dr. Thompson, the attending physician, hurried over. Irene, I need your help here. We worked quickly, removing the man's protective gear and assessing his injuries. Despite the severity of the crash, he seemed to have escaped with only a broken arm and some nasty bruises. As we cut away his shirt, I couldn't help but notice his toned physique and the expensive watch on his wrist. Where am I? The man groaned, regaining consciousness. You're at City General, I told him softly. You've been in an accident, but you're going to be okay. His eyes fluttered open, revealing startling blue irises. He looked at me, dazed, then managed a weak smile. An angel, he mumbled, before passing out again. I felt my cheeks flush and quickly busied myself with preparing his drip. Looks like you've got an admirer, Irene, Dr. Thompson chuckled. This is Jake Thornton, son of Richard Thornton. You know, the guy who owns half the city? Over the next few days, I found myself assigned to Jake's room more often than not. He was healing well, but his cocky attitude was beginning to grate on my nerves. Hey, Nurse Angel, he'd call out whenever I entered. Come to make my day brighter? I'd roll my eyes, trying to hide my blush. I'm here to check your vitals, Mr. Thornton. Nothing more. Despite his arrogance, there was something about Jake that intrigued me. He was more than just a rich boy with a pretty face. When he thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch him reading complex financial reports or speaking fluent Mandarin on his phone. On the day of his discharge, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. I told myself it was ridiculous, he was just another patient, and an annoying one at that. Well, Nurse Angel, Jake said as he gathered his things, I guess this is goodbye. Take care, Mr. Thornton, I replied professionally. Try to stay off motorcycles for a while. A week after Jake's discharge, I was going about my usual routine at the hospital. It was a quiet afternoon, and I was updating patient charts at the nurse's station when I heard a familiar voice. Excuse me, I'm looking for Nurse Angel. Have you seen her? I looked up, startled to see Jake Thornton standing there, a bouquet of flowers in his hand and that cocky grin on his face. He was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Mr. Thornton, I said, feeling my cheeks warm. What are you doing here? Is everything all right with your arm? He chuckled. Please, call me Jake. And my arm's fine, thanks to your excellent care. These are for you, by the way. He handed me the flowers. I accepted them awkwardly, aware of my coworkers' curious stares. Thank you, but why? Because I'm asking you out on a date, he said bluntly. And I'm hoping these might persuade you to say yes. Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. Okay, one dinner. But that's it. Jake's face lit up. Great. I'll pick you up at 8. Wear something nice. As he strode out of the hospital, leaving me standing there with a bouquet of expensive flowers, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd just gotten myself into. That night, I agonized over what to wear. My closet was full of practical clothes for work, nothing suitable for a date with someone like Jake Thornton. I finally settled on a simple black dress, the only one I owned. At 8 o'clock sharp, a sleek black car pulled up outside my modest apartment building. Jake stepped out, looking like he'd just walked off a magazine cover in his tailored suit. You look beautiful, he said, his eyes appreciative as he opened the car door for me. The restaurant he took me to was the kind of place I'd only ever seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers, soft piano music, waiters in tuxedos, it was all so overwhelming. Relax, Jake said, noticing my discomfort. It's just dinner. But it wasn't just dinner. It was the beginning of something I never could have anticipated. As we talked, I discovered that beneath his cocky exterior, Jake was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth. He told me about his work as a financial director in his father's company, and I found myself sharing stories about my life and my passion for nursing. You know, Jake said as we were finishing dessert, I've dated a lot of women, but I've never met anyone quite like you, Irene. I laughed. I'm sure you say that to all the girls. No, he said, his tone serious. I mean it. You're real, genuine, it's refreshing. As he drove me home that night, I realized that I was in dangerous territory. But when he kissed me goodnight, soft and sweet, all my reservations melted away. And as I watched his car disappear into the night, I knew that my life was never going to be the same again. The weeks that followed were like a dream. Jake and I started dating regularly, and I found myself falling harder for him with each passing day. But reality had a way of intruding on our fairy tale. The first time Jake took me to meet his parents, I knew immediately that they disapproved of me. So, Irene, Jake's mother, Elizabeth Thornton, said coolly, Jake tells us you're a nurse? I nodded, trying to hide my nervousness. Yes, at City General. How quaint," she replied, her tone making it clear she thought it was anything but. Jake's father, Richard, barely looked up from his newspaper. "And your family? What do they do?" "My father's a retired police officer, and my mother's a teacher," I said proudly. Elizabeth exchanged a look with her husband that spoke volumes. It was clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son. As we left that night, Jake squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about them," he said. "They'll come around eventually." But I wasn't so sure. The disapproval of Jake's parents cast a shadow over our relationship, one that I couldn't quite shake. Despite this, Jake and I grew closer. He showered me with affection and gifts, taking me to places I'd only ever dreamed of. But I never felt comfortable in his world of wealth and privilege. I was always acutely aware of how different we were. One night, after a particularly lavish date, I confronted Jake about it. "Why me?" I asked. "You could have any woman you want. Someone from your world. Why choose a simple nurse?" Jake cupped my face in his hands. "Because you're real, Irene. You're not with me for my money or my name. You see me for who I really am." His words touched me deeply, and I pushed my doubts aside. I loved Jake, and he loved me. Wasn't that all that mattered? 6 months into our relationship, Jake proposed. It wasn't a grand, elaborate affair, just the two of us, on the rooftop of my apartment building under the stars. It was perfect. We decided on a simple ceremony, much to the dismay of Jake's parents. But Jake stood firm, insisting that it was our day, not theirs. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Jake's beaming face, I felt like my heart might burst with happiness. This was the beginning of our forever. After the wedding, we moved into Jake's luxury apartment. It was bigger than any place I'd ever lived, with a view of the city that took my breath away. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," Jake said, scooping me up in his arms as we crossed the threshold. I giggled, still not used to my new name. "I love you, Mr. Thornton." Married life with Jake started off beautifully. We settled into a routine in our luxurious apartment, and I continued working part-time at the hospital. A few months after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Jake was overjoyed when I told him the news. "We're going to be parents," he exclaimed, spinning me around in our living room. "I can't wait to meet our little one." The pregnancy was relatively easy, and 9 months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. We named her Lily. Jake was by my side throughout the delivery, holding my hand and encouraging me. To my surprise, Jake's parents seemed to soften a bit after Lily was born. They doted on their granddaughter, showering her with gifts and attention. However, their attitude towards me remained cool and distant. "At least you managed to give Jake an heir," Elizabeth said during one of their visits, her tone a mix of approval and condescension. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that Lily deserved to have a relationship with her grandparents, regardless of how they treated me. As the months passed, I noticed subtle changes in Jake. He started working longer hours at his father's company, often coming home late and exhausted. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial. He'd ask me to prepare his suits and shine his shoes, but rarely inquired about my day or how I was feeling. One evening, as I was putting Lily to bed, Jake came home later than usual. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "Working late," he replied tersely. "There's a big merger coming up. I need to be prepared." I nodded, unconvinced. "I made dinner. It's in the fridge if you want to heat it up." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "I already ate at the office." This became our new normal. Jake would come home late, barely acknowledge me or Lily, and retreat to his home office. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always had an excuse. "I'm doing this for us, Irene," he'd say. "For our future. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." I felt a growing distance between us, a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. The man I married, the one who had swept me off my feet, seemed to be disappearing before my eyes. One day, I received an unexpected call from Elizabeth, Jake's mother. Irene, she said, her voice cold and disapproving. I hope you realize you're not fulfilling your duties as the wife of a financial director. Confused and hurt, I asked, what do you mean? You didn't even bother to come to the corporate party last night, she replied. Though perhaps it's for the best. You would have stood out among the gorgeous women there, and not in a good way. My heart sank. I hadn't known about any corporate party. Jake hadn't mentioned it to me. That evening, when Jake came home, I confronted him. Why didn't you invite me to the corporate party? Jake's face hardened. Irene, let's be honest. You're too simple for those events. I'd be embarrassed to have you there. His words cut deep, confirming my worst fears. The man I loved, the one who had once called me real and genuine, now found me embarrassing. The weeks following Jake's cruel words were tense. We barely spoke. I threw myself into caring for Lily and my work at the hospital, trying to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. One evening, Jake called to say he was staying late at work again. I decided to use the quiet time to clean up a bit. As I tidied his home office, I noticed his computer was on, the screen glowing softly in the dim room. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the mouse. I knew I shouldn't, but something compelled me to look. To my surprise, the computer wasn't password protected. With a shaky hand, I opened his email. What I found shattered my world. There, in black and white, was an email exchange between Jake and a woman named Vanessa. As I read through their correspondence, my heart pounded in my chest. They weren't just coworkers, they were lovers. They mocked me, calling me a hen, a fool, a redneck without taste. Jake praised Vanessa's skills in bed, while dismissing me as dull and unattractive. With trembling hands, I copied all the correspondence I could find onto a USB drive. I needed proof, something concrete to confront Jake with. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as Jake's words echoed in my mind. When he finally came home the next morning, I was waiting for him in the living room, Lily asleep in her crib. We need to talk, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I know about Vanessa. His face paled for a moment before a smirk settled on his lips. Come on, Irene. Did you really think someone like me would be satisfied with someone like you? Vanessa is everything you're not: beautiful, sophisticated, amazing in bed. Each word was like a knife to my heart. I'm your wife, I whispered. The mother of your child. And that's all you'll ever be, he sneered. I'm not giving up, Vanessa. You'll just have to deal with it. In that moment, something inside me snapped. No, I said firmly. I won't deal with it. This marriage is over, Jake. His smirk faltered. You can't leave me. You have nowhere to go, no money of your own. I'd rather be poor and alone than stay with a cheating bastard like you, I spat. I rushed to Lily's room, scooped her up, and grabbed the pre-packed bag I'd prepared earlier. As I headed for the door, Jake called out. You'll regret this, Irene. I'll make sure of it. I turned to face him one last time. No, Jake. You're the one who's going to regret this. With those words, I walked out of our luxury apartment, my daughter in my arms and my heart in pieces. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done being Jake Thornton's fool. The taxi pulled up to my parents' modest home, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. My mother opened the door before I could even knock, concern etched on her face. Irene, what's wrong, sweetheart? She asked, taking in my tear-stained face and Lily in my arms. Mom, I choked out. Jake, he's been cheating on me. My father appeared behind her, his expression hardening. That bastard, he muttered, ushering us inside. Over the next few hours, I poured out the whole sordid story to my parents. They were furious but supportive, insisting that Lily and I stay with them as long as we needed. But Jake wasn't content with just ending our marriage. He wanted to destroy me completely. I was served with court papers. He was suing for full custody of Lily, claiming I was an unfit mother. The allegations in the lawsuit made me sick. Jake painted me as unstable, neglectful, an alcoholic who cheated on him. Every word was a lie, but I knew how powerful the Thorntons were. My saving grace came in the form of the USB drive I'd taken from Jake's computer. In court, his smug expression faltered as my lawyer presented the evidence. The judge, a no-nonsense woman, saw right through his lies. In the end, I was granted primary custody of Lily, with Jake ordered to pay a hefty amount in child support and alimony. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. A few weeks later, as I was settling into life at my parents' house, a sleek car pulled up outside. Jake stepped out, followed by a stunning woman I assumed was Vanessa. "I'm here to see my daughter," Jake demanded as I opened the door. Before I could respond, Vanessa pushed past me into the house. Her nose wrinkled as she looked around. "My God, Jake," she said loudly, "this place is like a homeless shelter. And these old people? They're practically worthless." I saw red. How dare she insult my parents, who had welcomed me with open arms when I had nowhere else to go? "Get out," I hissed, my voice shaking with rage. "Both of you, get out of my house right now." Jake's face twisted with anger. "You can't keep me from my child, Irene. I'll take her from you, just wait and see." As I slammed the door in their faces, I knew this wasn't over. Jake and Vanessa wouldn't stop until they'd taken everything from me. I needed to fight back. That night, I called my father's old police buddy, now a private investigator, named Frank. "I need dirt on Jake and his new girlfriend," I told him. "Anything you can find." Frank's investigation yielded more than I could have imagined. Vanessa, it turned out, had a colorful past as an escort, living off rich men's money. But that wasn't all. She was currently embezzling from Jake's company and selling insider information to their competitors. Even more shocking, Frank uncovered evidence that Jake himself was far from innocent. He'd been siphoning money from the company into offshore accounts for years. I had the power to bring Jake and Vanessa's world crashing down around them. But I wouldn't act rashly. No, I would bide my time, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash this information for maximum impact. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. I was surprised to see Elizabeth Thornton's name on the caller ID. With some trepidation, I answered. "Irene," Elizabeth's cold voice came through the speaker. "My birthday is next weekend. I expect Lily to be there. You may accompany her if you must." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, a plan forming in my mind. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. As we approached the Thornton mansion, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Richard answered the door, his face a mask of polite indifference. "Ah, Irene. And little Lily, come in." The room was filled with the Thorntons' high society friends, all giving me curious looks. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Suddenly, the room fell silent as Jake entered, Vanessa on his arm. His face registered surprise at seeing me, quickly masked by a smug smile. "Everyone," he announced, "I'd like you to meet Vanessa, my fiancée and future wife." The room erupted in congratulations. Elizabeth and Richard fawned over Vanessa, showering her with compliments. "Oh, Jake," Elizabeth gushed, "Vanessa is simply wonderful. Such impeccable breeding and education. A much better match for you than, well." She glanced dismissively in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. But now was not the time to lose control. I waited until the excitement died down, then slowly stood up. "I have something to say," I announced, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I pulled out the folder from my purse and turned to address the room. "You all seem very impressed with Vanessa. But do you know who she really is?" The room fell silent as I began to reveal the truth. I explained how Vanessa was living under a false identity, how she had no real education, and how she had worked as an escort, sleeping with rich men for money. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Vanessa's face had gone pale, while Jake looked like he might be sick. But I wasn't finished. "And that's not all," I continued. Vanessa has been selling company secrets to your competitors. She's been embezzling money from the company accounts Jake so trustingly gave her access to. Richard Thornton's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Is this true? He thundered, turning to Jake and Vanessa. Before either could respond, I delivered the final blow. And Jake? Jake has been transferring company funds to offshore accounts for years. The room erupted into chaos. Richard grabbed Vanessa by the arm, practically dragging her to the door. Get out of my house, you deceitful witch, he roared. I'll see you in court for this. He then rounded on Jake, his hand connecting with Jake's face in a resounding slap. You're fired, you ungrateful scoundrel. How dare you steal from your own family? In the midst of the pandemonium, I calmly picked up Lily and headed for the door. As I passed Jake, who was holding his reddened cheek, I paused. I told you you'd regret this, Jake, I said softly. Goodbye. In the weeks following the explosive revelation at Elizabeth's birthday party, my life took yet another unexpected turn. One afternoon, I received a call from Richard Thornton. Irene, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Elizabeth and we'd like to speak with you. In person, if possible. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed to meet them at a quiet cafe the next day. As I walked in, I saw them sitting at a corner table, looking older and more subdued than I'd ever seen them. Irene, Elizabeth began as I sat down. We owe you an apology. A big one. Richard nodded solemnly. We misjudged you terribly. You saved our company, our reputation. We can never thank you enough. Over the next hour, we talked more openly than we ever had before. They shared their regrets, their shock at Jake's betrayal, and their hope for a fresh start. By the time we left the cafe, a tentative peace had been established between us. Life continued to evolve rapidly. Vanessa was arrested for fraud and embezzlement, facing not just a hefty fine but potential jail time. Jake, stripped of his position and his fancy apartment by his parents, left the state in disgrace. He would call occasionally to speak with Lily, but our interactions remained cold and distant. One day, Richard and Elizabeth invited me to their office. We have something for you, Richard said, handing me an envelope. Inside was the deed to a small but lovely apartment in a nice part of town. It's yours, Elizabeth explained. A thank you for saving the company. And a new start for you and Lily. I was overwhelmed by their generosity. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept it, Richard said warmly. And there's more. We'd like to pay for your education. You mentioned once that you dreamed of becoming a doctor? Tears welled up in my eyes. A cardiologist, actually. But I never thought. Now you can, Elizabeth smiled. Consider it an investment in our granddaughter's future. And so, at 30 years old, I found myself embarking on a new journey. Balancing single motherhood with medical school was challenging, but I was determined to succeed. Lily and I settled into our new apartment, building a life that was entirely our own. My name is Sarah, and I've been a dentist for over 2 decades now. It's a career I love, but the path to get here wasn't easy. As I sit in my office, staring at the framed diploma on the wall, I can't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that led me to this point. I grew up in a household where I always felt like the second choice. My parents, Jack and Linda, never tried to hide their preference for my younger sister, Emily. She was born when I was 10, and from that moment on, it was clear who the favorite child was. When it came time for college, I knew I wanted to pursue dentistry. It had been my dream since I was a little girl, fascinated by the way my pediatric dentist could make even the scariest procedures feel like magic. Mom, Dad, I've been accepted to the dental program at State University, I announced one evening at dinner, barely able to contain my excitement. The silence that followed was deafening. My father cleared his throat. That's nice, Sarah. But you know we can't afford that. We're saving for Emily's future. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But I've worked so hard. My grades are perfect, I thought. You thought wrong, my mother cut in, her voice cold. We've always been clear about our priorities. Emily has a bright future ahead of her. Well, you'll find something suitable, I'm sure. I ran from the table, tears streaming down my face. The next day, I visited my grandparents, Robert and Margaret. They'd always been kinder to me, more understanding. When I told them what happened, my grandfather's face turned red with anger. "Those fools," he muttered. "Don't you worry, Sarah. We'll make sure you get to that school." True to their word, my grandparents scraped together every penny they could to help me with tuition. I worked multiple jobs, studied harder than I ever had before, and eventually graduated at the top of my class. During my final year of dental school, I met Tom. He was charming, handsome, and seemed to genuinely care about me. We married shortly after graduation, despite my parents' objections. "You're making a mistake," my mother hissed at me during the reception. "He's not good enough for this family." I ignored her, convinced that for once in my life, I'd made the right choice. How wrong I was. The first few years were good. We had 2 beautiful children, Max and Lily, and I started building my dental practice. But as time went on, Tom changed. The charming man I'd fallen in love with disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. It started with the drinking. A beer or 2 after work became a 6-pack, then a bottle of whiskey. He'd come home late, reeking of alcohol, picking fights over nothing. I endured it for years, hoping he'd change back into the man I'd married. But one night, as I watched him nearly drop our infant daughter while in a drunken stupor, I knew it was over. The divorce was messy, but in the end, I got custody of the kids and kept my practice. The day I told my parents about the divorce, I foolishly hoped for some support. Instead, I was met with cold disappointment and blame. "I'm sure you're exaggerating," my mother said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Tom always seemed like such a nice man. You probably drove him to drink with your nagging." That was the last straw. I gathered my children and left, vowing never to seek their approval again. Meanwhile, my sister Emily's life seemed picture perfect. She'd become a psychologist, married a successful businessman named David, and had 2 boys of her own. My parents never missed an opportunity to remind me how much better she was doing. "Emily just bought a new house in that fancy neighborhood," my mother would casually mention during our increasingly rare phone calls. "Her practice is really taking off. It's so nice to have a daughter we can be proud of." Years passed, and I built a successful dental practice. I was doing well financially, even able to buy a nice apartment in a good area of town. Ironically, there were times when my parents would call, asking for money. "Sarah, your father and I are a bit short this month. We were hoping you could help out," my mother would say, her tone sugary sweet. Despite everything, I always sent them what they needed. Part of me hoped that by being generous, they might finally see my worth. But their attitude never changed. One day, I received a call from Emily. Our parents had passed away suddenly in a car accident. I was devastated, not just by their loss, but by the realization that we'd never have a chance to reconcile. "I'm in the Maldives with David," Emily said, her voice crackling over the international line. "Could you handle the funeral arrangements? We'll try to get back as soon as we can." So there I was, planning my parents' funeral while my sister lounged on a beach halfway across the world. I threw myself into the task, determined to give them a beautiful send-off despite our troubled relationship. The day of the funeral arrived, and Emily finally showed up, tanned and seemingly carefree. Right after the funeral, a lawyer approached us. "We need to discuss the will." I hadn't even thought about the will. Surely, despite everything, my parents wouldn't completely forget about me? But as the lawyer read out the details, it became clear that they had done exactly that. Everything, the house, their savings, even family heirlooms, had been left to Emily. There wasn't so much as a mention of my name. As I drove home that day, I made a decision. I was done seeking approval from people who would never give it. I had my children, my career, and my own life. It was time to live it on my terms. After the funeral, my relationship with Emily became even more distant. We rarely spoke, save for obligatory holiday greetings and birthday wishes via Skype. I'd catch glimpses of my nephews, Tommy and Jake, during these calls, but it was hardly enough to form a real relationship with them. From what I could see, the boys were growing up to be quite a handful. During one memorable video call, I watched a 6-year-old Tommy throw a tantrum because Emily wouldn't buy him a new tablet. "But I want it now," he screamed, his face red with anger. Emily just smiled indulgently. "Now, sweetie, we can't always get what we want right away. We'll talk about it later, okay?" I couldn't help but interject. "Emily, don't you think you should be a bit firmer with him? That behavior isn't appropriate for his age." My sister's face hardened. "I'm a psychologist, Sarah. I think I know how to raise my children without causing childhood trauma. They need to feel free to express themselves." As the years went by, my own children grew up and moved out to start their own lives. Max became a successful software engineer, while Lily followed in my footsteps and went to dental school. I was immensely proud of them both. With the kids gone, I found myself enjoying the quiet life of an empty nester. I adopted a cat, Mr. Whiskers, who quickly became my constant companion. My days fell into a comfortable routine of work, home, and the occasional dinner with friends. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, my peaceful life was shattered by a frantic knocking at my door. I opened it to find Emily standing there, mascara running down her face, with Tommy and Jake in tow. "Sarah," she sobbed, "I need your help. David and I had a huge fight, and I just need a place to stay for a while." I hesitated for a moment, remembering all the years of hurt and neglect. But looking at my sister's tear-stained face and the confused expressions of my nephews, I knew I couldn't turn them away. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. As they filed into my apartment, I got my first real look at Tommy and Jake in years. Tommy, now 9, had a sullen look on his face, while 6-year-old Jake was bouncing off the walls, touching everything in sight. "Jake, honey, please don't touch that," I said gently as he reached for an antique vase. He ignored me completely, knocking the vase to the floor where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. Emily barely reacted. "Oh, boys will be boys," she said with a weak laugh. "We'll replace it, won't we, Jake?" Jake just shrugged and moved on to the next breakable object. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that they were guests in my home and that this was just temporary. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that Emily had no intention of leaving anytime soon. My once tidy apartment descended into chaos. Toys and clothes were strewn everywhere, the walls were covered in crayon drawings, and the constant noise was driving me to my wits' end. One particularly trying afternoon, I returned home from a long day at the dental office to find my living room in complete disarray. The floor was littered with toys, crushed snacks, and what appeared to be the stuffing from one of my throw pillows. In the center of it all sat Tommy and Jake, gleefully engaged in what looked like a food fight with my good china as ammunition. "Boys!" I exclaimed, shock and frustration evident in my voice. "What on earth are you doing?" They barely glanced in my direction, continuing their rambunctious play without missing a beat. I looked around frantically for Emily, finally spotting her lounging on the balcony, engrossed in her phone. "Emily," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, "have you seen what the boys are doing?" She glanced up briefly, a look of mild annoyance crossing her face. "They're just playing, Sarah. Don't be such a killjoy." I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head before speaking again. "Emily, they're destroying my home. This has to stop." Emily rolled her eyes and reluctantly got up from her chair. She sauntered into the living room, surveying the chaos with a disinterested eye. "All right, boys, that's enough for now. Why don't you go watch some TV?" The boys cheered and raced off to the guest room, leaving the mess behind. I stared at my sister in disbelief. "That's it? You're not going to make them clean up?" Oh, relax, Emily said dismissively. I'll take care of it later. You're always so uptight, Sarah. It's not good for your blood pressure. As the days wore on, I found myself becoming more and more stressed. The constant noise, the mess, the lack of respect for my home and my rules, it was all taking a toll on me. Even Mr. Whiskers, my usually affectionate cat, had taken to hiding under my bed most of the time, only emerging for food and to use his litter box. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, a task that had somehow fallen solely to me despite Emily and the boys being my guests, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mrs. Johnson, my elderly neighbor from the floor below, standing there with a stern expression on her face. Dr. Sarah, she began, her voice tight with barely contained anger. I've always considered you a model neighbor, but these past few weeks have been unbearable. The noise from your apartment is constant. I can hear screaming and things breaking at all hours of the day and night. What on earth is going on up here? I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Johnson. My sister and her children are staying with me temporarily, and I'm afraid the boys can be a bit energetic. Mrs. Johnson's expression softened slightly. I understand children can be lively, dear, but this goes beyond that. And it's not just the noise. Have you seen what they've done to the hallway? She gestured for me to follow her. We walked to the stairwell, and I gasped in horror. The walls were covered in graffiti, crude drawings, and misspelled words spray-painted in garish colors. I recognized Tommy's handiwork immediately. This is unacceptable, I stammered, mortified. I had no idea. I'll clean it up right away, Mrs. Johnson. And I promise, it won't happen again. See that it doesn't, she replied firmly. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll have to report this to the building management and the appropriate authorities. Once she was out of sight, I leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the mess my life had become. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and marched back to my apartment. As I opened the door, I was met with the sound of Tommy and Jake's laughter, punctuated by the crash of something else breaking. Boys, I said firmly, turn that off. We have work to do. They ignored me, as usual. I strode over and switched off the TV. Hey, Tommy protested. We were playing that. Not anymore, I replied. You're going to clean up the mess you made in the hallway. Come with me, now. Grumbling and whining, they followed me to the stairwell. I handed them scrub brushes and a bucket of soapy water. Start cleaning, I instructed. They stared at me in disbelief. But Mom said we don't have to do chores, Tommy stammered. Your mom isn't here right now, I said. And in my house, we clean up our messes. They half-heartedly swiped at the walls, more interested in splashing each other than actually cleaning. I was about to intervene when I heard footsteps on the stairs. To my surprise, it was Mrs. Johnson's son, Mark, in his police uniform. He must have just gotten off duty. Everything okay here, Dr. Sarah? He asked, eyeing the boys suspiciously. Sensing an opportunity, I explained the situation. Mark's face hardened as he turned to Tommy and Jake. Listen up, boys, he said sternly. Vandalism is a serious offense. If you don't clean this up properly, we're going to have some real problems. Understand? The boys' eyes widened in fear. They nodded vigorously and began scrubbing the walls with newfound enthusiasm. I was supervising their progress when I heard the elevator ding. Emily stepped out, fresh from a trip to the beauty salon, her hair and nails immaculate. Her jaw dropped when she saw the scene before her. What the hell is going on here? She shrieked. I calmly explained the situation, but Emily wasn't having it. How dare you force my children to do manual labor? She yelled. This is cruel and unusual punishment. Cruel? I shot back, my patience finally snapping. Cruel is letting them destroy other people's property without consequences. Emily grabbed the boy's hands. Come on, we're leaving. I won't let you be subjected to this abuse. The next few days were tense. Emily and the boys stayed, but they barely spoke to me. I was starting to think things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. I came home from work one afternoon to find my apartment eerily quiet. "Hello?" I called out. A pitiful meow answered me. I followed the sound to find Mr. Whiskers huddled in a corner, his fur a startling shade of blue. "Oh my God," I gasped. The poor cat was covered in paint, frantically trying to lick it off. I screamed in horror and anger. Scooping up Mr. Whiskers, I wrapped him in a towel and rushed him to the vet, my heart pounding. The vet's diagnosis was grim. "He's ingested a significant amount of paint," she told me. "We'll need to keep him overnight for treatment." Leaving Mr. Whiskers at the clinic was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I returned home, shaking with fury. Emily was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I explained to her what happened to Mr. Whiskers, demanding she discipline the boys and help clean up the mess they'd made. Emily shrugged. "It's just a cat, Sarah. Don't be so dramatic." I couldn't believe my ears. "Just a cat? He could die, Emily." "Well, that's not my problem," she said dismissively. "And neither is the cleaning. It's your apartment, after all." The next morning, I arrived at my dental practice earlier than usual. My mind was reeling from the events of the past few weeks, and I knew I needed to get to the bottom of this situation. With a deep breath, I picked up my phone and dialed David's number. "David, I'm sorry to bother you," I began, "but I need to understand what's going on. Why did you and Emily have a fight? When is she planning to come back home?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, David let out a heavy sigh. "Sarah, I'm afraid Emily won't be coming back. We're getting divorced." David's story came pouring out, each revelation more shocking than the last. He told me how Emily had quit her psychology practice years ago, refusing to work or even help around the house. Their home had fallen into disrepair, and the children were completely out of control. "And then there were the vacations," he went on. "She'd jet off without me or the kids, using the money from your parents' inheritance. I thought she was just taking some time for herself, but..." His voice trailed off, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "But what, David?" "She was cheating on me, Sarah. Multiple times, with different men. God, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I had to get a DNA test for the boys. Thankfully, they're mine, but after all that, I just couldn't do it anymore. I filed for divorce and asked her to leave." After finishing the call with David, I sat at my desk, trying to process everything I'd learned. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Emily wasn't planning on leaving anytime soon. She was using me as a fallback, a free place to stay while her life fell apart. That evening, I confronted Emily. The boys were in the guest room, engrossed in their video games as usual, while Emily lounged on my couch, scrolling through her phone. "Emily, we need to talk," I said firmly, sitting across from her. "I spoke to David today." "Is it true? Are you really getting divorced?" Emily shrugged, an air of indifference about her. "Yeah, it's true. David and I are over. I'm tired of him and his expectations. But don't worry, sis. You'll help me out, right? After all, that's what sisters are for." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Help you out? Emily, you've turned my life upside down. You're not even trying to get back on your feet. What about your inheritance? Surely you can use that to find your own place." She laughed dismissively. "Oh, that money? It's gone, Sarah. There were barely crumbs left anyway." I felt my blood begin to boil. "Crumbs? Emily, our parents left you over $200,000. How could you possibly have blown through all that money?" Emily just shrugged again, reaching for her phone. "Life's expensive, Sarah. You wouldn't understand." In that moment, something inside me snapped. Years of resentment, weeks of frustration, all came bubbling to the surface. "No, you're the one who doesn't understand," I said, my voice low and controlled. "I've had enough. Get a job, start disciplining the boys, contribute to this household, or get out. You have 1 week, Emily. 1 week to show me you're serious about turning things around. Emily's eyes widened in shock. For the first time since she'd arrived, she seemed to realize I wasn't going to back down. A few days after my ultimatum to Emily, I returned home from a long day at the dental office. As I approached my apartment door, I was struck by an unusual silence. No shouting, no crashes, no sounds of destruction. It was peaceful. Warily, I entered the apartment. "Emily?" I called out. No response. I found Tommy and Jake sitting quietly on the couch, their eyes red and puffy as if they'd been crying. My heart sank. "Boys? Where's your mother?" I asked gently. Tommy wordlessly handed me a piece of paper. With trembling hands, I unfolded it and began to read. "Dear Sarah, I've realized that motherhood just isn't for me. I'm still young and I want to live my life. I've met someone, he's young, exciting, and doesn't have any baggage. We're leaving town together. You're always going on about responsibility and all that boring stuff, so here's your chance to put your money where your mouth is. The boys are your problem now. You're an old maid anyway, so you might as well be useful and raise them. Don't try to contact me. By the time you read this, I'll be long gone. Emily." I collapsed onto the sofa, my mind reeling. How could she do this? How could she abandon her own children? With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed David's number. When he answered, I could barely get the words out. "David, it's Sarah. You need to come over right away. It's about the boys." Within an hour, David was at my door. I handed him Emily's note without a word. As he read it, his face cycled through shock, anger, and finally, a deep sadness. "Oh, boys," he sighed, kneeling down to hug Tommy and Jake. "I'm so sorry." Over the next few hours, David and I talked, trying to figure out what to do. It was clear that the boys needed stability, and David was determined to provide that. "I'll take them home," he said firmly. "And first thing tomorrow, I'm going to file for full custody." I nodded, relief washing over me. "I think that's for the best." "And David, I'll help in any way I can. I'll testify, provide character witnesses, whatever you need." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. David filed for full custody, and I found myself recounting Emily's behavior to stern-faced judges and social workers. In the end, the decision was swift. Emily, who never even showed up for the hearings, was stripped of her parental rights. David was granted full custody of Tommy and Jake. As the dust settled, I found myself adjusting to a new normal. I visited David and the boys often, marveling at the changes in their household. David had hired a part-time nanny to help out, but he was also making a concerted effort to be more present in his sons' lives. One sunny Saturday, about a month after everything had happened, I visited their home. I was amazed to find Tommy setting the table for lunch, while Jake was helping David prepare sandwiches in the kitchen. "Aunt Sarah," they both cried, running to hug me. I embraced them tightly, noticing how much calmer and happier they seemed. "They're doing so well," I remarked to David as we watched the boys play in the backyard after lunch. "You're doing a great job. 5 years have passed, and life has taken unexpected turns. I'm still practicing dentistry, finding fulfillment in my work and enjoying quiet evenings with Mr. Whiskers, my faithful feline companion. Tommy, now 14, has become something of a local celebrity. His graffiti art, once a source of frustration, has evolved into a genuine talent. He's a popular blogger, showcasing his work online and even getting featured in the news. His success has brought him a decent income, unusual for someone his age." One Sunday afternoon, David and the boys were visiting me for our weekly family dinner. We were catching up on Tommy's latest art project when there was an unexpected knock at the door. To everyone's shock, it was Emily. She barged in, eyes fixed on Tommy. "I hear you're making quite a bit of money now," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "Mommy needs her share." David stepped forward, his face stern. You have no right to any of it, Emily. He pulled out a document from his wallet. You were stripped of your parental rights years ago. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. Emily's face contorted with anger, but seeing our united front, she turned and left without another word. We haven't seen her since. As for me, I continue to work and enjoy life's simple pleasures. I stay in touch with my own children, now adults themselves, cherishing our relationship. This unexpected journey has taught me the true meaning of family. It's not always about blood, but about love, support, and being there for each other through thick and thin. My name's Isabella, and I'm 21 years old. I just finished my third year at art college, and let me tell you, it's been one hell of a ride. But before I get into all that, you need to know where I come from. I grew up in a house where I never felt at home. My parents, Tom and Sarah, always made it clear that my older sister, Emily, was their golden child. She's 4 years older than me and has always been a thorn in my side. From the day I was born, Emily seemed to hate me. She'd tease me, break my toys, and make my life miserable. And my parents? They'd just laugh it off, saying, "Oh, that's just how sisters are." But it wasn't normal. I remember when I was 14, I had this huge crush on a boy at school. His name was Jake, and I thought he was the cutest thing ever. I'd spend hours drawing portraits of him in secret, hiding them under my mattress, where I thought no one would find them. But Emily found them. And you know what she did? She pinned them up on the school bulletin board for everyone to see. I still remember walking into school that day. The laughter, the pointing, the whispers. It felt like the whole world was crashing down around me. And Jake? He came up to me, all awkward and stuttering. Isabella. I saw the drawings. Look, you're nice and all, but I don't like you that way. I ran home crying that day. My parents were in the kitchen when I burst through the door, tears streaming down my face. Mom, Dad, Emily humiliated me at school. She found my private drawings in. But before I could finish, Emily waltzed in, a smug grin on her face. "Oh, come on, Izzy," she said, using the nickname I hated. "It was just a bit of fun. Not my fault you can't take a joke." And you know what my parents did? They laughed. They actually laughed. "Sweetie," my mom said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes, "you really need to toughen up. It's not Emily's fault you're such a crybaby." That's why, when I got accepted into art college, I was over the moon. It was my ticket out of that house, away from the constant mockery and belittlement. My grandmother was the only one who ever showed me any real love. She was the one who encouraged my art, who told me I had talent. When I got accepted, she insisted on paying for my tuition. "Isabella," she said, her eyes twinkling, "you've got a gift. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'll make sure you get the education you deserve." For 3 years, she paid for everything. My tuition, my supplies, even some extra for living expenses. But then, just before my final year, she got sick. I remember sitting by her bedside, holding her frail hand. She looked at me with those kind eyes of hers and said, "Isabella, my dear, I'm so proud of you. You're going to do great things." Then she turned to my parents, who were standing at the foot of the bed. "Tom, Sarah, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll pay for Isabella's final year. She needs to finish her education." My parents nodded solemnly. "Of course, Mom," my dad said. "We promise." Grandma died a week later. At the reading of her will, we found out she'd left her house to my parents and her jewelry to Emily and me. Emily, of course, immediately grabbed the diamond tiara. "I'll take this," she announced. "Isabella can have the ring. She doesn't care about jewelry anyway, right, Izzy?" I didn't argue. She was right, I didn't care much for jewelry. So I took the diamond ring and put it in a safety deposit box at the bank. I made friends quickly in college. There was Zoe, a punk rocker with a talent for abstract art, and Marcus, a quiet guy who could make sculptures that took your breath away. They didn't care about my family drama. To them, I was just Isabella, the girl who could paint like nobody's business. "Hey, Bella," Zoe said one day, using the nickname I actually liked. "There's a tattoo parlor downtown looking for someone to draw designs. You should apply." I was hesitant at first. My parents would flip if they knew I was working in a tattoo parlor. But then I thought, why should I care what they think? So I applied, and to my surprise, I got the job. The owner, a burly guy named Mike with more ink than skin, took one look at my portfolio and said, "You're hired, kid." For the first time in my life, I was earning my own money. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't tell my parents or Emily about it. I could already hear Emily's mocking voice. "Oh, little Izzy's drawing pictures for thugs now? How cute." College life suited me. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make my grandmother proud. My professors praised my work, and I even won a few small competitions. But more importantly, I was happy. The years flew by, and before I knew it, I was finishing up my third year. As the summer break approached, a familiar dread settled in my stomach. I had to go home. I opened the door and stepped into chaos. The living room was full of people, all bustling about with excitement. In the center of it all stood Emily, beaming as she held up a white dress. My mother noticed me first. "Oh, Isabella," she said, her smile faltering slightly. "You're home. We weren't expecting you so soon." I stood there, stunned. "Emily's getting married? When did this happen?" Emily turned to me, her smile turning into a smirk. "Oh, didn't anyone tell you? I guess we've all been so busy with the preparations, it must have slipped our minds." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My own sister was getting married, and no one had even bothered to tell me. "Who's the lucky guy?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Richard," Emily said, pulling forward a tall, handsome man I hadn't noticed before. "Isn't he dreamy?" Richard gave me a polite smile and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Isabella. I've heard so much about you." I shook his hand, wondering what exactly he'd heard. Knowing Emily, probably nothing good. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of excited chatter downstairs. Emily was holding court at the breakfast table, surrounded by our parents and a couple of her bridesmaids. As I listened to their conversation, I learned that Emily had broken up with her previous boyfriend at our parents' insistence. Apparently, he'd been mixed up with some dangerous crowd. "Thank God you listened to us, sweetie," Mom said, patting Emily's hand. "Richard is such a better match for you. And his family is so well off." I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Of course, that's what they cared about. "Speaking of Richard," Emily said, turning to me with a smirk, "he's taking me out to dinner tonight. Not that you'd know anything about that, right, Izzy? Still haven't found a boyfriend?" They all laughed, and I gripped my coffee mug tighter, willing myself not to cry. Some things never change. As the days passed, I tried to stay out of everyone's way. I spent most of my time in my room, sketching and counting down the days until I could leave. But one evening, I couldn't avoid the family dinner. We were all seated around the table when Emily dropped her bombshell. "I've decided to wear Grandma's tiara for the wedding," she announced. "It'll look perfect with my dress." "Oh, that's a wonderful idea," Mom exclaimed. Emily wasn't done. "But you know what would make it even better? If I had a matching piece to go with it. Like, oh, I don't know, a ring?" I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. I knew exactly where this was going. Mom's eyes lit up. "Oh, that's right. Isabella, didn't Grandma leave you a ring?" I nodded slowly, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. "Well, there you go," Emily said, clapping her hands together. "Izzy, you'll let me borrow the ring for the wedding, won't you?" I put down my fork. Borrow? For how long? Emily laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, silly Izzy. I mean, you'll give it to me. For keeps. But Grandma left that to me, I protested weakly. Come on, Isabella, Dad said, his voice stern. Don't be selfish. It's your sister's wedding day. I looked around the table, hoping to see someone, anyone, on my side. But all I saw were expectant faces, waiting for me to give in. Like always. Isabella, Dad said, his voice cold. Either you give the ring to your sister, or we won't pay for your final year of college. The room fell silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But you promised Grandma, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. Emily let out a harsh laugh. Oh, please. No one cares about promises made to some half-witted old woman. I stood up so fast, my chair fell over. How dare you talk about Grandma like that? I shouted. That's enough, Dad roared. Isabella, you have a choice to make. The ring or your education. Decide. I looked at their faces, Dad's anger, Mom's disappointment, Emily's smug satisfaction. In that moment, I knew I had lost. Again. With shaking hands, I took off the necklace where I kept the key to my safety deposit box. I handed it to Emily. The morning after the ring incident, I cornered Emily in the kitchen. When exactly is your wedding? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Emily looked up from her coffee, a sly smile playing on her lips. It's on the 29th. Why, planning to ruin it? I ignored her jab. 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks to get away from this toxic environment. No, I replied coolly. I'm going to visit a friend from college. I'll be back in time for the wedding. I packed my bags and left that afternoon, heading to my friend Zoe's place in the next city over. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Zoe and I spent the week exploring art galleries, hitting up local cafes, and just enjoying each other's company. It was exactly what I needed. But my moment of peace was shattered exactly 1 week later. I was scrolling through my social media feed when I saw it, photos of Emily's wedding. My sister, resplendent in white, the diamond tiara glittering on her head, and my ring sparkling on her finger. The caption read, "Just married. Off to the Maldives with my hunky husband." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. With shaking hands, I dialed Mom's number. Why didn't you invite me to the wedding? Emily told me the wrong date. There was a long pause. Then Dad's voice came on the line. Isabella, your sister, she didn't want you there. She said you'd ruin her perfect day. We thought it was best not to tell you. I felt like I was going to be sick. How could you do this to me? I'm your daughter too. Don't be dramatic, Mom chimed in. It's not like you really wanted to be there anyway, right? I hung up, my whole body shaking with anger and hurt. A few days later, I returned home, only to find Emily had also returned from her honeymoon. I walked into the living room to find her, Mom, and Dad huddled together, looking at apartment listings. I cleared my throat, and they all looked up. Don't forget about my tuition, I said, my voice small. You promised to pay for my last year if I gave Emily the ring. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Actually, Isabella, we've decided to use that money as a down payment on Emily's apartment instead. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. But you promised. You swore to Grandma. Plans change, Mom said dismissively. Emily needs it more. I'm sure you can figure something out. Emily was still laughing, a cruel, mocking sound that made my blood boil. Before I knew what I was doing, I lunged at her, grabbing a fistful of her hair. Emily screeched, and suddenly everyone was shouting. Dad yanked me away, his face red with anger. That's enough, he roared. Isabella, get out of this house right now. I ran to my room, threw some clothes in a bag, and stormed out, slamming the front door behind me. As I walked away from the house, my heart pounding and my cheeks wet with tears, I realized something. I found myself back at Zoe's place, feeling lost and broken. For days, I barely left her guest room, alternating between crying and staring blankly at the walls. Zoe tried her best to comfort me, but I was inconsolable. A week passed in this haze of despair. Then, one morning, as I listlessly checked my emails, I saw a message that made my heart stop. Congratulations! You are the winner of the annual art school competition. Your prize includes a full scholarship for your final year of studies. I read the email 3 times, not believing my eyes. Then I let out a scream that brought Zoe running. I thrust my phone at her, happy tears streaming down my face. I won. I won a scholarship. I can finish school. Zoe's eyes widened as she read the email, then she pulled me into a bone-crushing hug. Oh my God, Bella! This is amazing! For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I could finish my degree without my parents' help. I could make my own way. When the new semester started, I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor. Between my classes and my part-time job at the tattoo parlor, I barely had time to think about my family drama. Months passed, and I slowly started to heal. One day, I was hanging out with my classmate, Jake, who worked part-time at a local pawn shop. We were chatting about our day when he mentioned something that caught my attention. You won't believe what happened during my shift today, he said. This girl came in with the most beautiful diamond necklace and ring I've ever seen. Must have been worth a fortune. My heart skipped a beat. What did she look like? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Jake described a woman who sounded exactly like Emily. Can you draw the jewelry for me? I asked, my hands shaking slightly. Jake looked confused, but complied. As I watched him sketch, my suspicions were confirmed. The necklace was the one Emily had always bragged about, and the ring, it was my grandmother's ring. Jake, I said, my mouth dry, is there any way you could get me the security footage from the pawn shop? Jake must have seen the desperation in my eyes because he finally nodded. Okay, I'll see what I can do. A few days later, Jake handed me a USB drive. Here, he said. But you didn't get this from me, okay? I nodded gratefully and rushed back to my dorm room. With trembling hands, I plugged in the drive and opened the video file. There was Emily, clear as day, handing over the jewelry. But what made my jaw drop was what happened next. As she turned to leave, a man entered the frame. Emily threw her arms around him, kissing him passionately. It wasn't Richard. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding. As the man turned slightly, I gasped. I recognized him. It was Emily's ex-boyfriend, the one our parents had made her break up with because of his criminal connections. I sat back, my mind reeling. Emily had pawned her precious jewelry, including my grandmother's ring, and was apparently cheating on her husband with her criminal ex-boyfriend. Part of me wanted to immediately send this video to my parents, to Richard, to everyone who had ever believed Emily's lies. But another part of me hesitated. This was big. Too big to act on impulsively. Months passed, and I thought I'd put my family drama behind me. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Lisa, my mom's sister. Isabella, darling, I have wonderful news, she chirped, her voice bubbling with excitement. Your sister is pregnant. Can you believe it? They're having a big announcement party next week. Isn't it exciting? My heart sank. Of course, another family event I hadn't been invited to. That's great, Aunt Lisa. Thanks for letting me know. After hanging up, I sat on my bed, conflicted. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue cutting ties with my toxic family. But another part of me, the part that still held on to the video from the pawn shop, knew this might be my chance. A week later, I found myself standing outside my parents' house. Cars lined the street, and I could hear laughter and chatter from inside. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Mom opened the door, her smile instantly fading when she saw me. Isabella, what are you doing here? Pushing past her, I walked into the living room. The chatter died down as people noticed me. Emily, standing in the center of the room with Richard, looked like she'd seen a ghost. "What is she doing here?" Emily hissed. Dad's voice boomed through the room. "Isabella, get out of this house immediately. You're not welcome here." Confused murmurs rippled through the guests. I saw Richard's parents exchange worried glances. Mom, always one for saving face, plastered on a fake smile. "I'm so sorry, everyone. We've had to distance ourselves from Isabella. She's become quite greedy and unworthy of our family name." The room erupted into arguments. Some relatives defended me, while others sided with my parents. I raised my voice. "I have something to say." Gradually, the room quieted down. All eyes were on me. I turned to Emily. "Congratulations on your pregnancy, sis. But I have to ask, why aren't you wearing Grandma's tiara and ring?" Emily's face went pale. Her mother-in-law spoke up. "Now that you mention it, I haven't seen that beautiful ring in a while." "Emily, dear, where is it?" Emily stuttered. I sent them for restoration. They needed cleaning." I nodded slowly, pulling out my phone. "That's interesting. Because I have a video here that tells a different story." The color drained from Emily's face as I connected my phone to the TV. The security footage from the pawnshop began to play. There was Emily, clear as day, pawning the jewelry. And then, the moment that made everyone in the room gasp, Emily, throwing herself into the arms of a man who was definitely not Richard, kissing him passionately. The moment the video ended, chaos erupted in the living room. Richard's face contorted with rage and pain as he turned to Emily. "Emily, what is this? Who is that man?" he shouted, his voice cracking. Emily burst into tears, mascara streaming down her face. I can explain." Richard's mother stepped forward, her voice ice cold. "I think we all deserve an explanation, Emily." Richard's father, a stern-looking man, spoke up. "I think we need a paternity test." Immediately. As accusations flew and tempers flared, I quietly slipped out of the house. I had done what I came to do. The truth was out, and for the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Over the next few weeks, the full extent of Emily's deception came to light. Through the family grapevine, I learned that she had been secretly meeting her ex-boyfriend, the one with criminal connections, behind Richard's back. She had been spending Richard's money on him and even pawned her jewelry to pay off his debts. The paternity test results were the final nail in the coffin. The baby wasn't Richard's, it was her ex-boyfriend's. Richard, understandably devastated, filed for divorce. He sued Emily for a substantial sum, citing emotional damages and financial fraud. Her ex-boyfriend, upon learning of the pregnancy, vanished without a trace, leaving Emily to face the consequences alone. My parents, who had always put Emily on a pedestal, were forced to face the harsh reality of her actions. They had to take out a significant loan to help Emily pay the compensation Richard demanded. Their golden child had fallen from grace, and they were left to pick up the pieces. In a twisted turn of events, they tried to blame me for everything. Mom left a voicemail on my phone, her voice bitter and accusing. "Are you happy now, Isabella? You've ruined your sister's life. I hope you're proud of yourself." I deleted the message without responding. Their words no longer had the power to hurt me. As for me, I returned to college, threw myself into my studies, and focused on building the life I wanted. I cut off all communication with my family, changing my phone number and email address. The toxic cycle was finally broken. It's been 2 years since that fateful day when I exposed Emily's lies. I graduated from art college with honors, my final project earning praise from both professors and local art critics. Now, at 23, I'm working at the Harmony Art Gallery in the city. It's a dream come true, surrounded by beautiful artwork every day, helping to curate exhibitions, and even organizing events for up-and-coming artists. But that's not all. I've been painting in my free time, and to my surprise and delight, my work has caught the eye of several collectors. I haven't forgotten my roots, though. I still create tattoo sketches in my spare time. It's become a cherished hobby, a link to the past that reminds me of how far I've come. Some of my designs have even been featured in tattoo magazines, which never fails to make me smile. As for my family, well, that's a complicated story. I've maintained relationships with a few aunts and cousins who stood by me during the fallout. They keep me updated on the family drama, though I try not to let it affect me anymore. From what I hear, Emily is still living with our parents. She's unemployed, struggling to raise her child alone. Mom and Dad, facing financial troubles of their own, are constantly pressuring her to find a job and move out. The arguments are frequent and bitter, I'm told. I haven't spoken to my parents or Emily since that day. They tried reaching out a few times in the beginning, guilt-tripping messages, angry voicemails, but I stood firm in my decision to cut ties. Eventually, they stopped trying. On a brighter note, I've been dating a wonderful guy named Alex for the past year. He's a graphic designer I met at a gallery event. He's kind, supportive, and best of all, he understands my passion for art. We're talking about moving in together soon, another step towards building the life I want. My name's Amelia, and I'm 29 years old. For the past 5 years, I've been making a living as an event planner. Weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, you name it, I've organized it. It's not what I thought I'd be doing when I was younger, but life has a funny way of surprising you. I studied economics in college, but that's not where my passion lay. During my time there, I found myself drawn to organizing educational and entertainment events on campus. It started small, a study group here, a movie night there. But before I knew it, I was the go-to person for any event that needed planning. After graduation, I knew I couldn't see myself crunching numbers in an office. So, I took a leap of faith and started my own event planning business. It wasn't easy at first. I had to build my reputation from scratch, taking on any job I could get. No event is too small, I'd tell potential clients with a smile, even as I worried about making rent that month. But slowly, surely, word spread. One satisfied client led to another, and before I knew it, I had more work than I could handle. 5 years flew by, and here I am, with a thriving business and a reputation I'm proud of. Today, I'm sitting across from Mr. Johnson, a successful businessman who's turning 50 next month. He wants a party to remember, and I'm determined to give him just that. So, Mr. Johnson, I say, pulling out my notebook, what did you have in mind for your big day? He leans back in his chair, a thoughtful look on his face. Well, I was thinking something classy. Maybe a black tie affair at the Grand Hotel? I nod, jotting down notes. That's a great venue. We could do a classic Hollywood theme. Red carpet entrance, paparazzi-style photographers. As I'm mid-sentence, my phone buzzes. I glance at it, ready to ignore the call, but the name on the screen makes me pause. It's my sister, Sarah. Now, I should probably explain about my family. It's complicated. I have a younger sister, Sarah, who's 7 years my junior. She's always been the apple of our parents' eye. Don't get me wrong, my parents took care of me too, but there was always a difference in how they treated us. When I went to college, they couldn't find the money to help me out. It was my grandmother who stepped in, bless her soul. But a few years later, when Sarah went to college, suddenly, my parents had no problem paying for her tuition and a rented apartment. It stung, I won't lie. Over the years, I've learned to accept it, but it's left a mark. I don't talk to my family much these days. So, seeing Sarah's name on my phone is a surprise. I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, I say, standing up. Would you excuse me for a moment? It's my sister, and she rarely calls. He waves me off with a kind smile. Of course, take your time. I step out of the room and answer the phone. Sarah, is everything okay? Amelia, her voice is bright, excited. You need to come over to Mom and Dad's right away. We have big news. I sigh, knowing I'll regret this. Alright, I'll be there as soon as I can. I hang up and return to Mr. Johnson, apologizing profusely. I'm so sorry, but I have a family emergency. Can we reschedule for tomorrow? He's understanding, thankfully. I drove to my parents' house with a knot in my stomach. It had been months since I'd last been there, and I wasn't exactly looking forward to this impromptu family gathering. I rang the doorbell, and my mother answered, a forced smile on her face. Amelia, dear, come in. The living room was crowded. My father sat in his usual armchair. Sarah was perched on the couch, practically vibrating with excitement. Next to her was a man I didn't recognize, about my age, with a polite smile. Amelia. Sarah jumped up, grabbing the man's hand and pulling him forward. This is Mark, my fiancé. I blinked, surprised. Fiancé? Wow, congratulations. Mark seemed nice enough, but I couldn't help wondering how long they'd been together. Sarah had never mentioned him before. So, I said, turning to Sarah, is this why you called me over? To meet Mark? Sarah's smile widened. Well, partly. But there's more. She clasped her hands together, practically bouncing. We're having an engagement party soon, and I want you to plan it. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. Oh, Sarah, I don't know. I'm pretty booked up right now. Nonsense, my father interrupted, his voice gruff. This is your sister we're talking about. Family comes first. I bit back a retort about how family hadn't come first when I needed help with college. Instead, I forced a smile. It's not that simple, Dad. I have commitments to other clients. But you're the best at this stuff, Sarah insisted. And I want the most amazing engagement party ever. Of course it'll be free. You wouldn't charge your own sister, would you? I looked around the room, seeing expectant faces. Even Mark looked like he assumed I'd do this for nothing. I felt cornered. Okay, I said finally, my voice tight. I'll organize it for free. But you'll need to cover all the other expenses, venue, catering, decorations, music, everything else. Sarah squealed and hugged me. You're the best, Amelia. We'll pay for everything else, promise. As I left the house an hour later, after listening to Sarah's grand ideas for her perfect engagement party, I felt a mixture of regret and resignation. I'd have to call Mr. Johnson and cancel our rescheduled meeting. There went a lucrative contract. Back home, I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Johnson's number. Mr. Johnson? It's Amelia. I'm so sorry, but I won't be able to take on your birthday party after all. A family obligation has come up. My friend Lisa is also an event planner. She's excellent. I can give you her contact information if you'd like. After passing along Lisa's details and apologizing once more, I hung up. I stared at my phone, a sense of unease growing in my stomach. I'd just turned down a major client for a job I wasn't even getting paid for. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparations. I secured a beautiful restaurant for the date Sarah wanted. It wasn't easy, the place was popular and usually booked months in advance. But Tony, the owner of the restaurant, couldn't resist my pressure. I also worked with the chef to create a spread that would impress even the most discerning guests. Then came the decorations, the music, the invitations, every detail had to be perfect. I called my go-to DJ, Mike, to book him for the event. He agreed, albeit reluctantly. I had similar conversations with all my usual contractors, the florist, the cake baker, the photographer. They all trusted me enough to agree to delayed payment, but I could sense their unease. As the days passed, I found myself turning down other jobs to focus on Sarah's party. It was eating into my income, but I told myself it would be worth it to see my sister happy. Finally, with everything arranged, I sat down to create the invoice. I carefully itemized every expense, from the venue rental to the last flower in the centerpieces. The total was substantial. I took a deep breath and emailed the invoice to Sarah. There, I muttered to myself. All done. That evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Hey sis, I answered. Did you get the invoice? There was a moment of silence, then Sarah's voice came through, sickly sweet. Amelia, darling, there must be some mistake. Why are you sending me a bill? I frowned, confused. What do you mean? It's the invoice for all the expenses for your engagement party. Remember, you said you'd cover everything except my fee? Sarah laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, Amelia. I thought you understood. You're supposed to pay for all of this. You make so much money with your business. I was speechless. My mind raced, thinking of all the vendors waiting to be paid, all the promises I'd made based on Sarah's word. Sarah, listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I organized this for free, which is already a huge favor. I can't pay for everything else too. You promised. But Sarah had already hung up. I tried calling my parents, hoping they could talk some sense into Sarah. But to my horror, they took her side. They insisted I should pay, that it was my duty as the successful daughter. I hung up, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. How could they do this to me? How could they expect me to bankrupt myself for a party? As I sat there, trying to figure out what to do, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a post from Sarah on social media. Curious, I clicked on it. Can't wait for tomorrow's engagement party, the post read. So excited to celebrate with everyone. We've spent so much to make it perfect. In that moment, something snapped inside me. If Sarah wanted to play games, well, two could play at that. My fingers trembled as I dialed the restaurant's number. It was late, but I knew Tony would still be there, closing up after the night's service. Tony? It's Amelia. I'm so sorry, but I need to cancel tomorrow's event. I'll pay you a cancellation fee. And I'll make this up to you, I swear. Tony sighed. All right, Amelia. I trust you. But this isn't like you. One by one, I called all the vendors. The florist, the DJ, the cake baker, everyone. Each call was painful, each explanation more humiliating than the last. By the time I finished, my savings account was significantly lighter, but at least my professional relationships were intact. I'd paid everyone their fees and cancellation charges out of my own pocket. I barely slept that night. When morning came, I made myself a strong cup of coffee and settled in front of my computer. I knew Sarah would be live streaming her arrival at the restaurant. I wanted to see this. Right on schedule, Sarah's beaming face appeared on my screen. She was outside the restaurant, surrounded by a group of excited-looking friends and family members. We're here, Sarah chirped into her phone camera. I can't wait to show you guys everything. It's going to be amazing. I watched as she confidently strode up to the restaurant doors, her fiancé Mark in tow. She reached for the handle, still chattering away to her viewers. And here oh. The smile froze on Sarah's face as she tugged at the door. It didn't budge. That's weird, she laughed nervously, trying again. It must be stuck. But it wasn't stuck. Sarah's eyes widened as she finally noticed the sign on the door. Event cancelled, it read in bold letters. The live stream erupted in confused comments. Sarah's face paled as she turned to Mark, who looked equally bewildered. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as I watched the chaos unfold. It was petty, I knew, but after years of being the family doormat, it felt good to finally stand up for myself. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Sarah. Amelia, she screeched. What the hell is going on? The restaurant is closed. Everything's ruined. I kept my voice calm. Well, Sarah, since you refused to pay for the event you asked me to organize, I had to cancel it. I couldn't let my contractors go unpaid. But what about the food? Mark's voice came through faintly in the background. "Where's all the food we were supposed to have?" I couldn't help but smile a little. "Oh, the food? I donated it to a homeless shelter. At least someone will enjoy it." More screaming followed, but I'd had enough. I hung up the phone. About 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. My mother's voice came through, shrill and angry. "Amelia, how could you do this to your sister? We raised you better than this." I felt a surge of frustration. "Mom, did Sarah tell you what she tried to do? She wanted me to pay for everything." "So what?" My father's voice boomed in the background. "You're doing well for yourself. You could have helped your sister out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dad, we're talking about thousands of dollars here. I'm not made of money." "You're just being selfish," my mother snapped. "Your poor sister is heartbroken. Her special day is ruined because of your greed." I tried to stay calm, but their words were cutting deep. "Greed? I organized everything for free. I even paid cancellation fees out of my own pocket." But they weren't listening. My mother's next words felt like a slap in the face. "You know what I think?" she said, her voice cold. "I think you did this because you're jealous. You're almost 30, Amelia. No husband, no children. You couldn't stand to see her getting married while you have no one." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. How dare they? How dare they twist this around and make me the villain? As I sat there, trying to process everything that had happened, an idea struck me. If Sarah and Mark had promised to pay for everything, where did that money go? They must have had it, right? I opened my laptop and drafted an email. In it, I detailed all the expenses I had incurred, including the cancellation fees. I demanded that Sarah and Mark reimburse me for every penny. "If you don't pay," I wrote, my fingers flying over the keyboard, "I'll be forced to take legal action." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It was a bold move, I knew, but I was done being the family pushover. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing again. This time, it was a barrage of text messages from Sarah and Mark. I steeled myself and opened them. The messages were a mix of threats and insults. Sarah called me every name in the book, while Mark threatened to ruin me if I tried to take them to court. I saved screenshots of every message. If this did end up in court, I wanted all the evidence I could get. I also needed advice from someone who might have some insight into Sarah's fiancé and his family. That's when I remembered my Aunt Linda. She always seemed to know all the town gossip. Maybe she could tell me something about Mark and his family. I dialed her number, hoping she'd be willing to talk. "Aunt Linda? It's Amelia. I need to ask you something about Sarah's fiancé." Aunt Linda's voice crackled through the phone, warm and familiar. "Amelia, dear. It's been ages. What do you want to know about Mark?" I took a deep breath. "Well, I was wondering if you knew anything about his family, their financial situation." "Oh, honey," Aunt Linda chuckled. "You're asking the right person. The Thompsons, that's Mark's family, they're quite well off. They own a chain of laundromats across the city, and word is they've got their fingers in some lucrative real estate deals too." I felt my jaw drop. "Wait, what? They're wealthy?" "Oh yes, very much so," Aunt Linda continued, oblivious to my shock. "Why, I heard they gave Mark a hefty sum to arrange that engagement party. $30,000, if the rumors are true." My mind was reeling. $30,000? And they had tried to make me pay for everything? After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for a few minutes. Then, determination set in. I knew what I had to do next. It took some digging, but I managed to find the address of Mark's parents. Without giving myself time to second-guess my decision, I got in my car and drove there. The house was impressive, a large, well-maintained property in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. A middle-aged woman answered, her eyebrows raised in curiosity. "Can I help you, Mrs. Thompson?" I asked. When she nodded, I continued, "I'm Amelia, Sarah's sister. I need to talk to you and your husband about Mark and the engagement party." She looked surprised, but invited me in. Soon, I was sitting in their living room, facing both of Mark's parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'm here because I think you should know what happened with the engagement party." Over the next half hour, I explained everything. How Sarah had asked me to organize the party for free. How they had promised to pay for everything else, but then refused. How I had been forced to cancel everything and pay the cancellation fees myself. As I spoke, I saw the shock and dismay growing on their faces. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Mr. Thompson spoke, his voice tight with anger. "We gave Mark $30,000 for this party. He told us everything was paid for." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They believed me. Mr. Thompson left the room and returned a few minutes later with his checkbook. He wrote out a check for the full amount I had spent, plus a little extra for my trouble. "It's the least we can do," he said, handing it to me. "And don't worry, we'll be having a very serious conversation with Mark and Sarah about their behavior." As I left their house, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, vindication, but also sadness. This whole ordeal had exposed some ugly truths about my sister and her fiancé. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with texts. It was Sarah and Mark again, but this time their tone was very different. Gone were the threats and insults, replaced by panicked apologies and pleas for forgiveness. In the weeks that followed, I heard through the grapevine about the fallout from my visit to the Thompsons. Aunt Linda kept me updated. "You won't believe this, Amelia," she said during one of our phone calls. "Mark's parents have cut him off completely. No more monthly allowance, no financial support for the wedding, nothing." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. "Really? That's quite drastic." Aunt Linda's voice lowered conspiratorially. "Oh, honey, they were furious. Apparently, they don't take kindly to being lied to and having their money misused. Can't say I blame them." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "What about the wedding? Is it still happening?" There was a pause, then Aunt Linda chuckled. "Well, that's the kicker. Without Mommy and Daddy's money, Mark and Sarah can't afford the lavish wedding they were planning. Last I heard, they'd postponed it indefinitely." My parents, predictably, didn't see it that way. They blamed me for Sarah's misfortune, conveniently forgetting that it was her own actions that had led to this situation. "You've ruined your sister's life," my mother said during one particularly heated phone call. "Are you happy now?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Mom, Sarah, and Mark tried to scam me out of thousands of dollars. They lied to everyone, including Mark's parents. How is that my fault?" But it was like talking to a brick wall. In their eyes, Sarah could do no wrong, and I was the villain who had destroyed her happiness. Despite the family drama, my life went on. I threw myself back into my work, rebuilding the client base I had neglected during the engagement party fiasco. Slowly but surely, things started to look up. One day, as I was leaving a meeting with a new client, I ran into Mr. Johnson, the man whose 50th birthday party I had canceled to work on Sarah's engagement. "Amelia," he called out, a smile on his face. "How have you been?" I felt a pang of guilt. "Mr. Johnson, I'm so sorry about canceling on you like that. It was unprofessional of me." He waved off my apology. "No need for that. Your friend Lisa did a wonderful job with the party. But I have to say, I missed your personal touch." An idea struck me. "Well, if you're planning any events in the future, I'd love the opportunity to make it up to you." Mr. Johnson's eyes twinkled. "As a matter of fact, my company's 25th anniversary is coming up. How would you like to handle that?" As I walked away, contract in hand, I couldn't help but feel that things were finally looking up. Yes, my relationship with my family was strained, but my business was thriving, and I had my self-respect intact. One evening, as I was poring over seating arrangements, a loud knock at my apartment door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. To my shock, I saw Sarah and Mark standing there. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "What are you doing here?" Sarah brazenly pushed past me into the apartment, Mark trailing behind her. "We're moving in," she announced. I blinked, sure I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Sarah said, her tone accusatory. "Because of you, Mark's parents cut us off. No money for the wedding, no allowance, nothing. So, we decided we're going to live here." I couldn't help it, I laughed. The sheer audacity of their plan was almost impressive. "You can't be serious. This is my home. You can't just decide to move in." Mark stepped forward, his face twisted in anger. "You owe us, Amelia. You ruined everything." I felt my patience snap. "I owe you nothing. You tried to scam me, remember? Now get out of my apartment." As I shut the door behind them, I heard Sarah's parting shot, "You'll be sorry." A few days later, I returned home from a meeting to find my apartment door surrounded by a strange, foamy substance. It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing: construction foam, hardened around the entire perimeter of my door. Furious, I called a locksmith service to remove the foam and replace my locks. As I waited, my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, approached me. "Amelia, dear," she said, concern etched on her face. "I saw what happened. I have it on video if you need it." Sure enough, Mrs. Chen's security camera had captured Sarah and Mark in the act of vandalizing my door. The footage was clear as day. Armed with this evidence, I went straight to the police station. I filed a report for property damage and requested a restraining order against both Sarah and Mark. The legal process was draining, but ultimately satisfying. The court fined Sarah and Mark for the damage to my apartment and ordered them to cover the costs of repairs. More importantly, they were banned from coming within 500 feet of me for the next 2 years. When my parents found out, they were livid, not at Sarah, of course, but at me. They couldn't believe I'd taken legal action against my own sister. "How could you do this to your family?" my mother wailed over the phone. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "No, Mom. The question is, how could you support Sarah after everything she's done? I'm done being the family scapegoat." With that, I hung up the phone and blocked their numbers. It hurt, cutting ties with my family, but I knew it was necessary for my own well-being. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work. Mr. Johnson's anniversary party was a resounding success, earning me glowing reviews and a slew of new clients. As I stood at the back of the beautifully decorated hall, watching the guests enjoy themselves, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Yes, I'd lost my family, but I'd gained something far more valuable: self-respect and the knowledge that I could stand on my own 2 feet.